Alliance Minor Hockey and Hockey Tech Joint Streaming Initiative. And I have a bunch of the delegation coming up. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you. Your Worship, Waterloo Councillors, members and staff, my name is Tony Martindale, Executive Director of Alliance Hockey. Joining me today is Ray Kosmovic, Senior Vice President, Alliance Hockey, Dan Halliburton of Hockey TV, and the President of Waterloo Minor Hockey, Hans Roach. On behalf of the Waterloo Minor Hockey Association, we're here to provide information to allow the broadcast of certain hockey games via the internet from Waterloo's Rim Park Pillars Arena. Alliance Hockey is the governing body to which Waterloo Minor Hockey is a member. Scope of the project would be minor midget AAA and midget AAA. Facilities, Rim Park. The exposure is to promote players to the Ontario Hockey League, the GOGHL. Ontario Hockey League would be the Kitchener Rangers, and the GOGHL would be Waterloo Siskins and the teams that are in those specific leagues. Viewing opportunities, many scouts attend the games. Currently, and then as we move forward, this would be another tool for them to watch games through live streaming. It's also a good model for us in terms of team referee development. Would assist us with our league operations, player safety, and rule interpretation. The group project, we have a letter that would go out to all of our associations, and we plan to notify those participants in those associations. That would consist of approximately 370 participants. The Alliance Hockey Associations, our relationship with the teams, we have 12 minor midget teams and 8 midget. Currently we're working to hardwire those facilities for those 20 teams. We started this process in January of 2018 to our presidents, making a presentation to those presidents. As was indicated earlier, we're partnering with Hockey Tech. Through our websites, subscriptions, scouts, families can purchase subscriptions. And then Hockey TV, the City of Waterloo, and Waterloo Minor Hockey, we plan to partner to provide this service. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dan Halliburton from Hockey TV.
Great, thank you very much. Just want to give a little bit of background on the platform that this service would be streamed on. It's called Hockey TV, and Hockey TV is a product of Hockey Tech. We stream just hockey, and we stream hockey games from all over North America. Currently, we stream about 25,000 games a year, so this would be part of that bundle. Some refer to us as the Netflix of hockey. We license content, so in this arrangement, we would be licensing the content from the Alliance, and we would stream it both live and on demand. And some of you may have heard recently, we have a new partner with the American Hockey League this year, so it's the same platform that we're talking about. Hockey Tech itself moved to Waterloo in 2015, and we moved our broadcast operation, so we monitor each game that's broadcast, and we moved that from Boston to Waterloo a little over a year ago. We currently have 66 employees in our Waterloo office, and we hire focusing mainly on our students and young adults up in that area. In the community, obviously, Hockey Tech is a large partner with many local charities and organizations. In particular, Hockey Helps the Homeless with its tie to hockey. We field a team every year, and each year we've been awarded as the top fundraising team. And this year we partnered with Mike Farwell in a special promotion he had going. In terms of the platform itself, one of the important areas is data security. And Hockey Tech has been providing services for 15 years to every NHL team, every Canadian Hockey League team, the 132 teams in the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Hockey Canada, USA Hockey, the United States Hockey League, North American Hockey League, and the USPHL. So we're well versed in protecting the data of our partners. We have similar projects that go on right through Ontario. From leagues like the GOJHL, which is more local, to Hockey Canada. And specific to situations where we're partnering with minor hockey, we've done this in Ottawa with the Hockey Eastern Ontario Midget League, and up north with the Great North Midget League, which is a 10-team league up in the Northern Ontario. We do similar events for event-based partnerships with the Ontario Hockey League and Ontario Hockey Federation. And with that, we've gone through a process with city staff in dealing with many issues that they've brought forward, and enjoyed working with city staff on that project, as well as with the Alliance and Waterloo Minor Hockey. And with that, once again, we'd like to convey this as an important project for the Alliance, an important project that's part of our industry that we move forward with. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Tony. And just to confirm to Council, we're actually not approving anything. This is for information and part of a public consultation. Julie, do you want to clarify anything on that part?
Yes, so staff have been working with Alliance Minor Hockey and Hockey Tech, as mentioned. This is really an agreement with Alliance Minor Hockey and Hockey Tech. Waterloo Minor Hockey is one of our tenants, and so we've been working with them to ensure that they're meeting applicable legislation and also addressing any of the concerns that we've raised throughout the process.
So at this point in time, we just have to be informed, and citizens have to be informed of this.
Yes, through the chair, this is really an opportunity to let council know about this initiative and let the public know. There will be other public notices as well at the facility, so that when games are being broadcast. And there's other measures that have been taken into consideration around camera placement, issues such as that.
Wonderful, thank you. I think first up was Councillor Whaley, and then Councillor Veith.
Well, since you moved from Boston to Waterloo, we've heard some great things about Hockey Tech. I had no idea that you have 25,000 games. That's incredible.
Yes, and that was last year. This year we plan to be closer to 40,000.
Wow.
With
so we're putting Waterloo on the map as like the go-to place for hockey information, huh? Hockey information in general, because statistics as well, correct?
Yeah, so this is one of our platforms, Hockey TV. It integrates with some of our other technologies, but the NHL, we actually broadcast the NHL season in terms of content every 2 weeks during the calendar year.
Incredible. Why did you pick Waterloo?
Literally access to programmers and the tech culture that is Waterloo, and that's important for us.
So you found out where the talent is in North America and picked Waterloo because of the talent. That's so amazing.
It's very important for our owner, Stu Siegel, to be part of this, and with the Communitech family that we're involved with, and the outreach that we can have through charities and be involved with the community is very important.
So we're so happy to use this as a platform to tell your story just a little bit, and hopefully the media will pick up even more how big it is and how exciting it is. With respect to the offering itself, I'm interested to know, are these fixed cameras, or do you send out camera crews with movable cameras?
Yeah, this project is going to be a traditional tripod with camera mounted on it, and it's streamed over the internet exclusively. So it's a way that most teams are taping their games now in a non-broadcast sense. So this would be hooking it up to the internet to be able to provide that service to people that can't make it to the games.
So tonight, in this council chamber, we're going to have Rogers TV setting up cameras and following our activities tonight, but they're robotically controlled. My question is your staff around this, or are they robots?
Yeah, so there is technology, and part of our American Hockey League solution involves some autonomous cameras. This particular project at this time does not.
Thanks and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Next up, Councillor Veith, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks for coming today. It's great that you're here in Waterloo, for one, and that you're so involved in the community. The Hockey Helps the Homeless and those kind of things. So are you streaming only elite games? So
there's a variety of different solutions. So to give you an idea of the two new ones that we have, the American Hockey League would be next to the NHL, obviously. So that's very high-level professional hockey. We also have a partnership with the Sensplex, so it would be a multi-pad facility up in Ottawa, and we're literally going to be streaming with autonomous cameras 11,000 games this year out of that facility. So it would involve tyke hockey all the way up to midget and junior hockey.
Okay, and one more question. I'm not sure if I should ask this or not, but is this just is girls hockey under your alliance?
No, it's just boys hockey. So girls hockey would be the OWHA.
Further questions at this time? If not, as a hockey dad of two rep hockey players who had to go to Sarnia several times a year, this would have been really convenient about 10, 15 years ago. Particularly on nothing wrong with Sarnia, for those watching on the webcast, nothing wrong with Sarnia, just a long drive. And there goes the whole day. So thank you very much to Hockey Tech for moving here. Thank you very much to Stu for his amazing fundraising. I hope, tell him there's a second place challenger, so he has to fundraise even harder for the homelessness initiative. And thanks to Waterloo Hockey and the Alliance for coming out today. Next up, we have consent motion with the revised community cash grants policy, along with number 2 being the parking lot salt maintenance plans. If anyone is happy with those, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent motion. Councillor Veith and Councillor Henry are. All those in favor? Thank you. That's all of us. Item 6A, staff reports. Contract award, the re-roofing contract for Rim Park and Albert McCormick Community Center, prepared by Al McGregor. I'm sure there's not a presentation, but Al's here for questions. Councillor Henry.
I'll be happy to move it when the time is right. I think this is generally good news that the tender came in significantly lower than the cost estimate, and I noted in the report that that means we'll be able to replace more of the roof that desperately needs replacing. But can you tell us a little bit more about how that will work? Because I know we've tendered the main areas that we had, but how do we make sure that we're getting good value on the additional roof that we're getting covered?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. We have to be careful that we adhere to the purchasing bylaw, so we can't really change the scope of the work. If there were some minor roof areas that we could address, we could do that, but no major areas.
So I didn't read it correctly in that we'd be able to get more roof covered.
I clarified it further with procurement.
That's always useful. The procurement bylaw, rules, but it does mean we've got some additional money in the capital budget to deal with the long backlog that I know Sunda has and that you have as well. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Tracy, for keeping us on the straight and narrow. Further questions on the roof? Moved by Councillor Henry, seconded by Councillor Veith. Oh, missed you. Next time I'll watch for you, Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? So all of us, thank you. Thank you, Al. And thank you, Sunda. Item B, condominium conversion application 30 CDM 17404 at 49 Columbia Street West, prepared by Rita Salak. No presentation. Questions for Rita. Councillor Whaley.
Good afternoon, Rita. I was interested to read about this conversion, that the building was constructed in 2008, and there were 18 all five-bedroom units. That was the sign of the times back in 2008. And the amenity space was a picnic table in the backyard. And that was what we were doing in 2008, and my, how times have changed. So I'm curious to know now that, you know, the intention that we've seen a couple of these all 5-bedroom units go on the market to be sold. Who would buy one?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure who would buy one. I'm sure there's a market for them. That's really up to the owner to decide who to sell it to or whether there's a market for them.
So if they are sold, then the owner is out of the game, and the onus on care and upkeep goes to a condominium corporation, and the current owner is out of the game, and the onus falls onto new owners.
That is correct. So the owner converts it to a condominium. There'll be condominium units, and I'm imagining the owner would sell it off, you know, through time, maybe a couple of years, but they would retain some of the units for a certain amount of time, and then the condominium corporation would take over and manage everything in the building.
Okay, thank you, Rita.
Any further questions? Seeing none, look for a mover.
I'll move it with a comment.
Okay, moved by Councillor Henry with a comment, seconded by Councillor Freeman.
And again, this is to staff for the future. One of the things that I observe in many of these is that we prohibit commercial parking operations and the ability of the condominium owners or board to be able to lease out any surplus spaces that they may have from time to time to the neighborhood. I think this is generally prudent in terms of making sure that the off-street supply is well managed, but I would encourage staff to take a broader look in the future about what we might do about parking supply on street and off street, and thinking about how we can more flexibly use it so that we can be as efficient as possible in the future. I think that Cam and I discussed a couple of ideas on where I think this might intersect, but I don't know that a blanket prohibition in the declaration is going to continue to make sense as these come forward. I think we might be able to be a bit more creative and flexible to deal with parking needs in ways that don't cost us money.
Seeing no further commentary, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Lois, thank you. And thank you, Rita. Next up, very exciting part of the program, the Uptown Public Realm Draft Strategy and POPS Guideline consultation. Janice Mitchell. Welcome, Janice.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. Over the last number of years, as we've done our planning work, whether it's at the high level with the official plan and station area planning, or more specific to Uptown in terms of Uptown setting its priorities and the Uptown Vision Committee and our community improvement work, we've noticed that, of course, public realm has become a very important theme, in particular high quality public realm moving forward. As Uptown grows up, it's important that we make sure that the land uses that we're accommodating are also accompanied by high quality public realm. So about a year ago, Council initiated the Uptown Public Realm Study. And we've been working since that time, working hard with our consultant, and I will introduce her in a moment. I'm just going to do a quick intro to let you know what you're looking at tonight in terms of the staff report. There's actually two pieces in the staff report. The first is the Uptown Public Realm Strategy, and the second is a draft guideline for privately owned, publicly accessible spaces. We've got both of those things in the document, and we're going to go forward with both of them for consultation, assuming Council approves the document tonight. And I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities. We're going to start tomorrow with some sort of informal drop-in sessions in the atrium. We're going to put up some presentation materials, and we've invited people to come in and chat with the consultant and myself, and hopefully some members of the study team, and keep that kind of informal. We're also going to do an online survey so that people who can't be here can go online, look at the document, and we've got some specific questions we want them to help us with as we move forward in terms of finalizing the study and looking at implementation and establishing what their priorities may be. So I'm just going to turn things on their head a little bit and talk about the second attachment first before I introduce Brenda, so that we can keep things moving. As part of our work to help Council understand how this document might be used, we've developed a draft POPS guideline, or privately owned, publicly accessible space guideline. It's clear that Uptown is developing. We're seeing a lot of change, and it's clear that we're going to need to use all the opportunities that we can to work with members of the development community to make sure that we're getting public access to spaces, even though they may remain in private ownership. And the example that you see there is Bauer, that happened back sort of mid-2000s, 2005, I think it was. Sort of a great development that happens to have a publicly accessible space through it in terms of the courtyard. But that was done sort of somewhat ad hoc in terms of just good site design. And we thought it might be great to develop a guideline so that we can understand what POPs are, why they're important as we move forward in Uptown, how we're going to get them through the development approval process, and what are some of the criteria around how they should be designed, where they should be located, how they might be operated. So we've come forward with this now as one specific example of how the Uptown Public Realm strategy might start to get implemented. When we came forward with the background document, a few members of council said, how are we going to use this? How do we make sure that it's not, sort of the dusty document on the shelf? How do we make sure that we understand how we're using it in our daily work? So this is just one example that we thought we'd show you where we can quickly come forward and start to do these types of implementation pieces. Just one example. As if you've read, taken the time to look through the document in detail, you'll see there's lots of tidbits in there in terms of what we can do. So the moment, the exciting moment of the presentation, I'm going to introduce Brenda Webster-Tweel from Stantec Urban Places. Brenda and her team have been working closely with our staff study team, which includes members from IPPW Engineering, Planning Approvals, Growth Management, Environment and Parks, we've got Transportation, we've got Active Transportation, we've got Parking, a great breadth of membership on our staff study team, and everyone has been working hard with Brenda and her team to make sure we could bring forward a document that we're proud of. So Brenda Webster-Tweel from Stantec Urban Places. Onward.
Thank you, Janice. Just make sure I can move forward properly here. Whoops. Spacebar. Technologically suffering.
This?
There we go. Thank you. I got it. I just want to give a shout out to Janice and Scott and the study team, because really they were just the best partners possible. They kept us on our toes. They made sure we did everything right and didn't forget anybody. And it was just a wonderful relationship to have. Great clients. So thanks, Janice. So just to walk through the public realm strategy, some of you may have read it, some of you may not have. Some of you may remember we had a big public forum, which we had sort of ended with people introduced by the mayor, and we had everybody sitting in comfy chairs, including Scott Nevin as urban experts. And then we developed some urban systems, some priority initiatives, and then we suggested implementation tools, and they jumped right on it and built one already as soon as we mentioned one. So this project is already not collecting dust. It's already started on some level with the work that has been done. So to introduce the project, we've highlighted the most important part of this project. It's the spaces between the buildings. So we know that there is going to be a great deal of growth, and that we need a series of systems that we can think about. So we want to be able to breathe in Uptown, to move through Uptown. We want to frame it with buildings that we feel proud of, and we want to celebrate our heritage, and we want to inspire our community through arts and culture. So we developed a series of urban systems that recognize those important elements of how we live in a city. As I mentioned, the city is, Uptown in particular, is on the cusp of great change. Already, King Street has been rebuilt. LRT systems have arrived, and that will bring new gateways to the city. So the traditional road gateways are now layered up with gateways that the LRT provides in terms of ways of arriving in Uptown. And then furthermore, some priority initiatives that we have brought forward that talk about gateways that are active gateways. So how did we get here? Well, over the year, we have done just one great mapping exercise after another. We started with the close study team, and then we expanded it to larger and larger teams until finally we had the stakeholders and then the Uptown Charrettes. The image here is from one of the charrette groups that was working on that day, and then that evening the public forum. And what happened was we always drew on trace, and as we started to layer it up, we noticed sort of themes that were developing, and that's how the sort of principles were arrived at. So the systems that truly came out of that public forum, naturally we had in mind that these were important systems, but we didn't know exactly where they were going to be deployed or what they would look like. So here are the 5 maps that kind of relate to those 5 ideas about how to live in Uptown. Parks and open space, connectivity, naturally urban form is extremely important because it's like the walls of the outdoor room that we all share. How do we celebrate our heritage? And finally, how do we build on the amazing culture and arts that are already here in Waterloo? Next, the priority initiatives. So there are 3 priority initiatives, and they relate to what I like to say are public realm pieces that are already hiding in plain sight. So there is the Laurel Trail, and what it really needs is to really green up and connect with the super trails that exist throughout the Waterloo region. And it's almost like if you could imagine taking that bicycle lock and clicking it closed, because right now where the Laurel Trail is, it's really stressed when it gets into Uptown, naturally, because it's a place of roads and cars and so forth. But to kind of give it its balance against the hard, sort of rebalancing the hard and soft to give cyclists a chance. As I was driving here, I saw this cyclist waiting for all of us to drive by, and I saw a couple of pedestrians trying to get across the street. So I think it's about rebalancing between all the different forms of accessibility and mobility. So there's the Laurel Greenway. The next one is the Civic Common. Again, there's an opportunity that has just come forward with this neighborhood where we are right now in City Hall, the Civic District, and the greening just south of City Hall with the connection of a series of parks that already exist. And finally, Willis Way, the youngest of the streets in Uptown, that has the opportunity to show its youthfulness and regenerate even further, particularly on the Regina end of things, to become a kind of continuous pedestrian and, balanced mobility, cars as well, but that you begin to connect better to the 2 award-winning parks on the either end. So the Barrel Warehouse and, of course, Cenotaph Park. So those are the 3 priority initiatives. So here we are at the Laurel Greenway. What we also do with these 3 is that each one of them wraps itself around an LRT platform. So if we think of the LRT platform as one of the newer gateways into Uptown, it can move out from there. When you arrive, you feel you're somewhere. You're in this place. You're in the middle of the Laurel Greenway. You're close to the public square, and you're close to the public square station. You can move through to the award-winning Glass Museum and the Perimeter Institute, or you could move east and up through the Laurel Trail. The Civic Common is more than just the Civic Common. So it's the regional waterworks site, Heritage Green, Brewmeister Green, of course, but it's also a place, as you're coming down Regina Street, you see a sort of sense of arrival. And if you're coming north from Allen Street, how to green it up to sort of guide people towards this great Civic Common. And finally, Willis Way, which is this connector between these 2 wonderful parks, which again, to some extent, could get way more use than they currently do. Implementation. So naturally, as we implement, it's important to consider which priority comes first, and often that will have to do with opportunities that present themselves, combined with the kind of feedback from everybody in this room and the wider stakeholders and public, and to really be ready for those emergent opportunities. So by having this kind of matrix and this kind of priority initiative mapping, when projects come up, we can see where they exist next to these priorities. And in conclusion, we look forward to next steps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Janice. Questions from councillors? Councillor, do you want to go first or back clean up? Okay. Councillor Whaley. Councillor Maven.
Waterloo is such a wonderful place to live that people are flocking here from all over, and we've got to make some room for them to be here. A couple of weeks ago, we approved an iconic building in one of our primary nodes, a twin tower iconic building, and it was interesting to see the resistance from the heritage community. Even though no heritage buildings were lost in this development, there's a fear from the heritage community that this growth, this pressure for growth, because people want to live in Waterloo, and we're not going outwards anymore, we're going upwards. Why should there always be this resistance and this friction between the heritage community and the development community? Aren't we all after the same thing? And you address heritage as one of the key features of making this core livable, and yet there seems to be this resistance or fear that we cannot have it all, that we have to either knock down all the old buildings to put up new buildings, or to keep the heritage buildings we have to thwart growth. Why can't it be all?
Well, I like what you said at the beginning, where you said the developer kept all the heritage, and there's a recognition by really sort of forward-thinking developers who know the value of heritage. Their heritage cannot be recreated, and the best way to keep heritage is to have a strong and innovative dialogue between the great architecture that is proposed and the heritage that is in place so far. So I would agree that there can be a dialogue, and it can be a strong dialogue, and the importance is, fear often comes from lack of knowledge. So by looking out for great examples around the world, searching those out, finding examples of where heritage is kept and even strengthened by new uses and by integrating with great architecture, there's no question that the two can not only coexist, but be stronger by their union. And so it's really important to do the research, look at what's out there, bring everybody to the table early, and begin the conversation.
Thank you. Next up, Councillor Maven.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Brenda, this has been to council before in an earlier form, and my question is going to be very similar to what I asked at that point in time. Is if you go to slide 9 or 10. I can't help you there, sorry.
Someone's got it for me, thank you.
Okay, next one, 10 then.
11, maybe?
I'm looking for the one that shows Waterloo Park. Big green space that we don't build into the study. I thought it was 8 or 9, or maybe it was 8. There it is.
There we go.
Thank you very much. It was 8.
Right.
Shows you how my short-term memory is done. But if you look at that map, and it says, okay, there's the green space, and we're talking about building green space into the uptown.
Yes.
Yet this study just draws a barrier around that giant green space and does not include it.
I would love to speak to this.
Yeah, okay. You probably give the same answer you gave me last time, but I won't remember it. So.
Oh, okay. Well, it is a beautiful green space, and this has been presented to us originally. Uptown has a very clear, distinct border, and it only includes a very small portion of the park, right? So we already know that it wasn't Janice or myself or anybody else who created a border that kept the park up. That's the first piece, right? You with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So then the question is, how do you get people to the park? And how do you get people, not just in Uptown, but in the greater region of Waterloo and in the city of Waterloo, used to the idea of engaging with a green space, of being active, of not only moving for special events, but moving every day all the time. So to get to using a green space, there needs to be this concept of ritual and daily life that includes green space so that you can create that connection. It's not much different than the conversation we just had about Twin Towers and heritage. So in other words, to be able to integrate those two, there needs to be a strong dialogue. And right now that dialogue is very difficult because of certain intersections that are very hard to cross. And so by getting people to and from that park, and by creating greening within Uptown that sets a tone for everybody who lives in Waterloo about what green spaces mean and why they're important, not only will it bring more life to Waterloo Park, but it'll bring everybody to Waterloo Park with a recognition that, oh, that's a great tree, we better hang on to that tree, and so on and so forth. You know, to start integrating is the first step to get recognition of the value of both of these pieces. Yes. Well, no, it doesn't stop. It's just that that's the border. Obviously, it keeps going, and there are some maps within the strategy that show it continuing right through the park. But naturally, we are committed to just talking about Uptown. Of course it does. That's what I was talking about with the bicycle lock, right? The continuation, yeah.
Next up is Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll have a few, I think, for both. I think just as a note to pick up on, Councillor Maven's comment, yes, it's there. Yes, I see it reflected in the strategy as getting people to it. But I would agree insofar as the strategy that you then have concrete between the park and the next time you say green space, and I think that's what the strategy is trying to highlight, that you lose the narrative as soon as you enter Uptown. You shouldn't, and I think that's what I've heard. So I think I appreciate very broadly the moves that you've got described. I mean, when we eventually approve this, we'll approve a long list of initiatives. That doesn't mean we've actually approved all of the initiatives. We'll have to go through processes, but I think the big moves are really critical, that in this document we get the details right enough, because those will be the big expectations. I think that's probably something that we can agree to. So on that, I have a couple of questions about the details of the big moves at this stage that I'd like to see us do some more work on before they come back. The first of which is the Willis Way connection. I'm curious about conversations that we've had with traffic and parking operations, given we have a parkade that empties onto a stretch, given the suggestions of turning it into one way, but it should be a shared space, but it also has sidewalks. It has trees on this strategy, but on the actual right-of-way you're showing me, it has no trees. So I'm curious about how much work is being done on ground truthing, some of that high-level strategy area on that big move, and how much might be done before we see the final strategy next year.
So in terms of ground truthing, we have drawn the section of the area, and naturally there are completely different conditions west and east of King.
Yeah.
So, and we also know that there is a project underway east of King, or potentially, or in the works, or I don't know where it's at exactly now, but we've been made aware of it as something to think about. So we are saying that as a young street, and as a street that is very connected to two parks that have had a great deal of effort and design and build out into them, that those need to be, however possible, brought more into the view of the public, so that the public can be made aware that there are these two beautiful public parks that they can go to and have their lunch and integrate with on the weekends, And right now, there is, for whatever reason, the way Willis Way works and the way you stand at Willis Way and look at Cenotaph Park, there's no knowledge that there's this amazing creek there, there's this amazing park there. And so by focusing on Willis Way as a place of interest, we bring that to light. And so much of what this strategy is trying to do, and I believe to, is achieving, is showing what is already there. And I think what was great about the charrettes that we had was that, every time we turned a corner, they say, well, we have this amazing park here, and we have this wonderful street here. And it was really all just about connecting everything. From Waterloo Park to Cenotaph Park to Barrel Warehouse Park is about, making that wonderful King Street that's already started. How do you pull King Street down? And really building on the assets that are already in place.
So I appreciate that, and I think that gives some frame to how we might make sure the recommendations are specifically framed when this comes back, so that we don't lose sight of those key moves, and that some of the rest are details that may look different as we actually do some engineering 5 or 10 years down the road when we get a chance to do it. Because I worry about some of the details being baked in for expectations, but they may not be how we actually are able to develop it. It may meet the intent, but look a bit different. I'm seeing Mr. Rapp now come back and ask about King Street.
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski. If I can add a couple of comments, because we have specifically, when I say we, it's not been Brenda and I, but it's been members of the growth management team. And I have talked about, as an example, Willis Way. And I'm also a member of the Transportation Division. And we've looked at this and wanted to keep blue sky open. Let's talk about it. It would have been simple as a member of transportation to say it doesn't work, but we want to keep an open mind. There's no conclusion yet, but let's keep talking about it. And so that's an example of this plan of how we want to unfold it. Let's continually keep talking about things based on the goals and objectives of what we're trying to occur.
And just a tiny bit to add to that, we know that the way people move is changing. So when we intensify, the likelihood is there will be many more people walking and many more people cycling, because they'll live and work in the area as this mixed-use density continues. So being sure that there is room within these 3 priorities as a place to congregate, to move through, is critical. That's why we didn't suggest this throughout everywhere, but rather try to locate places, and those places tend to be where the LRT arrives. So that's part of the strategy behind this.
Yeah. And I'm not disagreeing with any of that. As someone that walks, from transit to City Hall through that concrete jungle today, completely agree with where the vision's trying to go. I just want to be careful around how we set expectations. And speaking of expectations, I think they're really high on King Street South. I think you've identified an appropriate concern that many people in the community have, and that all the work we've done north of the LRT station was not reflected in the contract that built south of that LRT station in the public square. But what I'm trying to reconcile, and what I've tried to reconcile with numbers, is the right-of-ways I'm seeing, the design criteria I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing on the road, and I am struggling to picture the space to do the cycle track that's been identified, and that will be picked up like a lightning rod to throw at City Hall from now until it's done, if it's not actually possible. So there are some initiatives I think I really want to know before approving the eventual strategy that we can deliver on, because they will be things that people will expect us to deliver on, and I want to know that we can do it. So I highlight that as one. I'd be happy for a reply if you have it, or just to see it later next year.
Sure. I mean, I think the response is that we've looked at it and we've seen how it would work, and we can certainly put wording around it to give comfort, to say this is the strategy, and at this point we see this as the best solution, and naturally as things change and other pieces get redeveloped, we know that there will be a redesign when it comes to actually do the work. I mean, Janice can speak to that too, but this is a point in time, and at this point in time we see these as the best moves, and naturally there will, of course, be a design on the ground. This is a strategy.
Okay, appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have further conversation. Last question is to Janice on consultation between now and when this comes back. I think you highlighted at a high level a couple of things that were going to happen, but we started this with a bang, and what I heard at this point was out in the atrium and up online. Is that what we're doing between now and the end? Because we started with a bang. I think the expectations are high for people to continue to be engaged in how this comes back to council.
Yeah, at this point, that's what we've decided to do to try to move things fairly quickly while we've got some momentum around this date. I think it's fair to say that Brenda and I we've talked a little bit more about what that bang might look like at the end of the process. It comes down a little bit to budget and expectations around what's left there. But that's certainly something we can look at, because I think you're right. We had a very a fulsome process at the beginning, and we want to make sure that we don't lose that at the end. So right now we've defined these few steps. I think I'd like to see what we have happening tomorrow and over the next few days online and whatnot, and then we can go from there.
I just want to add a little bit to that we really feel that where to put the bang is in the beginning, because we want everybody actively engaged in the design itself. So you can have a big bang at the end after you've already decided everything and, who really had the input. So we kind of turn it around a little, because we really believe that where we want the energy, we want to bring the council, the study team, the stakeholders, the public into the studio with us. And that's basically what we did. That feels like a bang. It's big because you're getting everybody there working around the table. It was actually pretty agile in terms of budget, because we were offered the space. We brought in a lot of people who were not paid, who were subject matter experts, who were just excited to be there. And so I think that way you get much more, and you get authentic engagement. So I hope that helps you understand why there was so much effort in the beginning and how it brought us here today.
And I think the only thing I would raise on that is making sure that those groups that were engaged in that big bang, that agile work, that process that had them draw on the page and get that done, feel like, and we know that they feel like they're represented in what's come out of it, because they've been engaged enough, again, to see it and have seen that all the work they put in is reflected in what's coming forward to that. And I that's just what I want to make sure that we've done. Absolutely. The circling back, because I didn't necessarily hear that as part of the strategy. I want to make sure that that's part of the strategy.
Well, Janice didn't mention it, but she's already reached out to all those people.
Yes, all the folks.
They all know. Yeah.
The charrette participants and those that were at the forum, with the exception of yourself, actually, because I knew you'd be here today, received a personal email that we were doing this and that we'd be in the atrium tomorrow.
Okay. That's helpful, because it does close the loop.
Okay.
Okay, before I turn over to Councillor Durrell, I had two questions, one of which was just emphasized by Councillor Henry on the consultation. Maybe there's an opportunity with the Amplify conference in terms of getting some notoriety there on our project. That would be good. Just on that, what about, there were dozens of ideas. There were lots of drawing going on. What happened to, I love how it's succinct down to 3 big projects now, but what happened to all those other ideas? Where are they parked? Maybe to Janice or Brenda.
Well, I just want to reiterate, at the forum, and I can share the kind of forum engagement moment with you in terms of having images of all the projects. Scott may remember, certainly, we had layers of trace, and in each room, we literally took those layers and layered them up like a palimpsest, and we found the priorities in that process. So of all the work, it was literally there to see right through, and we found this shape that kept recurring, which was the Laurel Greenway, and all the different layers
in that forum.
Yes.
In the forum. Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Answer my question. Now, before I let Councillor Durrell take it home, I have 2 more hands up. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Whaley. Everybody's excited, Councillor.
I just didn't think we all need to raise our hand at the same time.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So with regard to the conversation that was started earlier by 2 of my colleagues around Willis Way, I just didn't know whether we wanted to be more specific in terms of what that public space might look like. We showed a few examples, but I didn't know if we were really going to go to the extent of, thinking of a one-off styled space right around the public square itself, and so like an actual shared street, like we've designed for Hickory. So I wanted to leave that out there for you to look at, I guess, in the next draft. And then
sorry, I don't completely understand the question. To look at Hickory Street?
Woonerf Street, Woonerf, for Willis Way.
So we did look at that. That seemed a bit too extreme from most of the comments that came back. We're interested in it. At the same time, there are a lot of complexities on that little stretch of Willis Way with the parking garage, potentially parking coming from the south, the intersection of Regina and King. There are a lot of complexities in that piece. What we are saying is that there has to be more balanced mobility.
I'm thinking the other section, actually, between Caroline and King.
Well, and so then the point there is that it's just been done fairly recently, and it's pretty good. And so we feel that really more of what we're talking about for Willis Way is this concept of having more people feel comfortable using it, making it more connected to the parks, bringing forward ideas for events that will close it down more often, that it'll become a street, and that maybe over time it could be redesigned as Hickory Street has been. But I don't see that happening tomorrow. I think that,
and I never saw this document as a happening tomorrow document, so I am thinking in a longer term.
Right, and that's the thing of trying to balance like how people see it now, and certainly as a Wooner, it makes a lot of sense because it's very short, and it's connected to parks, and it's right in the center. So, yeah, longer term vision, I could see that for sure.
So then my other hope was that in the next draft that we could also at least show Alexandria Park on the side, because we've just spent a lot of money to make that park go through to William Street, and I realize it's not like it's on the border of the uptown, but it is a connection, and I think with the investment that's being made there, we should show that. And then my other comment was with regard to the privately owned public spaces guideline. And when we go out for consultation, can we also help people to understand how those guidelines will be used and whether or not in planning applications we're going to require urban design reports to speak to this aspect, or what the fundamental goal is? Because we use our urban design guideline as a tool to say we want to see a planning justification report and we want you speaking to all of these elements. And if that's the goal for the POPs, I'd like to know going into this so we make sure that council at least understands when they're reading that guideline that it has some kind of implication beyond just a guideline, like our urban design guidelines. There's a lot of, if you put through a planning application, staff will say we need you to address these particular aspects of the urban design guideline in your planning report. And I want to understand how those will be used. I know that we talk about using height and density in Section 37 agreements as a potential implication or a way to implement this POPs guideline, but I think there's value in helping people to better understand how we intend for those to be used.
So I just want to say, I think that, Janice, you should speak to this too, but part of POPs is that they actually are benefit to both public and private. That's the kind of genius of them. And particularly where the priorities are, I just put this map up, and anytime there's a development anywhere near one of these priorities, that they could help build the priorities, if you see what I mean. So that there is an opportunity. We know that values go up quite significantly when there's parkland nearby. So that it's a real benefit, to the developer and to the city, to public and private, to develop these spaces because they benefit both, they improve both, and so on and so forth. So I think you're absolutely right. Having a conversation, even before there's any kind of debating about what's required to allow for it or what needs to be given for it to happen, that there can be a conversation about how beneficial it is and how it's been proven in other situations that the POPs has actually increased the value of the development.
Okay.
I think to just comment on that, I think I understand what you're saying. The guideline is really all about what are they, how would we try to get them, how would we manage them. I hear you saying I'd like to understand how this guideline fits into the process, and I think that's something we can help to explain a little better.
If I could just follow up, I would say that all the things you mentioned are the same things we would say about urban design guidelines, about
Right.
how that makes a better development, and yet to many developers, they feel that it makes it very difficult for them to achieve the city's expectations. And so I just want to be clear on how these will be used in the planning process.
I think that's what Janice was, yeah.
Next up, Councillor Whaley, then the long-awaited Councillor Durrell.
My question is around these POPs as well. The three main thrusts of your ideas around the Laurel Greenway, the Willis Way, and the Civic Commons, which are all public spaces already, and will require a lot of public funding down the road. But the POPs are a different animal entirely.
They're not completely. So, for instance, Laurel Way right now is not as wide. Laurel Trail is not as wide as Laurel Greenway that's drawn there. So the concept.
So it will require public-private partnership to fulfill the major dream.
It's also an infrastructure play because, of course, it's an area that is very flood-prone. So there are huge advantages not to build there and to actually get the benefit of the POP. So then what you end up happening is you have this public-private partnership that exists in an area that would actually be very arduous for a developer to actually develop in that space. So there's a gift and there's a take and there's an addition. And then by doing that little POP in your personal property, you then become a partner in the Laurel Greenway, and you can say, I have developed on the Laurel Greenway, I have developed at the Civic Common. So they become these authentic nodes and lines within Uptown that then speak to how valuation and how things grow within Uptown on a sort of meta level.
So just to build on Councillor Freeman's idea with respect to paying for all this stuff, is the idea for the POP to have a public contribution to make it happen?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah.
Well, you're asking the developer to participate by creating public space on private property.
Right.
But with respect to making this dream happen, is there an intention for the city and the citizens to contribute to the cost of this private property becoming public space?
So the city is responsible for the city space. The advantage is that all of a sudden the developer finds him or herself right at the edge of this priority initiative. And so with just a little bit of effort, all of a sudden connects to this initiative. So that is how we see this. So yes, it's public, private, and private.
If I could just add to that as well, some of the tools that are talked about in the guideline are the Section 37 bonusing and potentially a reduction to a parkland dedication. So it would be negotiated through using tools like that in terms of the developer receives some benefit in terms of a reduction or additional density in terms of height and density in exchange for providing that public access. So it would be using tools like that.
And I see Mr. Rapp has his hand.
Certainly, I was just going to add, other than the Section 37 that Janice talked about, there is absolutely no intention to utilize public funding within private areas. Absolutely none, to be clear.
And that looks like all our time. No. Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. And if I could just add, actually, before I dole all over you, I do think too that it tells the people the developers, what's happening beside them. So it inspires them and gives them a vision. And I think that to me is the most important part of it. Because really this is, I said to Janice last night, this is everything Uptown wants and needs. It's visionary and it's doable. And what I love the most about it is it's grassroots. This is truly the people of Waterloo, the people of Uptown have come together and created this plan, and it's fantastic. And how can a plan fail if we've all done it together? I learned that after 8 years of politics. So there's just a few things that I wanted to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your expertise around it. So we were really ready for this document, and I know you referenced the Uptown Vision Committee a couple times in this report, and I think they've sort of been dancing around really putting things into an actual strategy like this. So how does a committee like Uptown Vision now, because you're done, as much as we hate to lose you, but so how do we start to task our committees? And I'm thinking of the Uptown BIA as well, and our Uptown Vision Committee. How do they start to take this document and help the city move it forward?
Well, do you want to say? I just want to say, like, in the report itself, we do have those little
tactical urbanism.
Exactly.
Love it.
So the BIA is the perfect group, and the Uptown Vision group together are the certain groups that are already working on events and planning and so forth. So to kind of focus them and get people out and in these spaces as they are, to understand, the play. I know we started out with saying Uptown play. I mean, what is the play here, and how do you play here to get everybody to understand how, how this is going to be a change maker by using these spaces now?
So I know that the BIA is doing their strategic plan for the next 4 years. So this is the kind of document that should really drop into their hands as they move it forward. So just to highlight that. One of the other things I noticed, and I hear it a lot, is the North Uptown, right? So north of Irv, Bridgeport, it often feels a little bit neglected. Now, I understand a lot of that is private. I mean, we just in the last couple council terms have started to purchase some properties up there, but really a lot of it's privately owned. Is that where Pops will come into play then? Because it's got this beautiful smile, and I don't know what that is, and beard, but then we're missing that whole Uptown.
So we did talk a little bit about that, and there was an area where we really felt there should be like a little, maybe Cyclops eye above the smile, a little park just east of King Street there. Right. And, fair enough, Waterloo Park is off the map, and if we put it on the map, it would show that it definitely covers the north, certainly the northwest, maybe not the northeast. So we thought just a little pocket park in the northeast, and we talk a little bit about it in the document, that there is the need for something there if you want everything to be almost like a, depending on how fast you walk, between 3 and 5 minutes, and you can get to a green space. Also, we know how much density is sort of intended in this area, so we really wanted to carve out the smile, as you call it, to really create this sort of central band that people come south or north to at the center. And that there should be potentially a pocket park, to your point, to the northeast there.
One of the things that's put throughout this is sort of the cheap and easy trees, to put them up and down, and I love the tree-lined idea. The issue that we have with it is we've just rebuilt a lot of our Uptown, and so ripping up a sidewalk doesn't seem like a really good idea, frankly. So what have other communities done, or how do we start to integrate these tree-lined routes around your 3 priority initiatives, or our 3 priority initiatives?
Right. And I think it comes into the implementation. Whoops. I don't know how to go backwards. Who did that for me before? Okay. Whoops.
There you go. Back one more. 2 more. Oh.
Up. Not doing it right. Okay, sorry. Who's in charge here? Okay. So in the implementation portion, we talk about priorities. So the concept is, when an opportunity comes up, when you know there's going to be some digging, that you have trees front and center in your mind, and that trees are something that we talk about, and certainly is very important to think about, is that trees are immensely valuable. I'd like to partner with the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants to get them to give a higher valuation for trees in every financial statement.
Agreed.
Because the truth is they're incredibly valuable. They're actually infrastructure. And when they are planted, one of the biggest things is making sure they have space. We use silvicels, we use other ways of describing them as infrastructure, giving them space underground, using the right soils. Trees are not cheap to plant because if you plant them right, you need silvicels and soils and all sorts of other things.
We know, we just did it.
Yeah. So the first thing is setting that priority,
okay.
having the kind of, radar up for every time there's an opportunity that shows itself, and then making sure there's room for it, and showing the valuation of that tree and how that is not depreciating, but actually growing in value over years as it grows, and keeping it on the books and keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's, I guess, and that's really a question that I had for staff was, there's a lot of really great ideas in here, and, instead of calling it low-hanging fruit, we call it tactical urbanism. And I love to see that open streets is getting a new life on Willis Way too. So that's great. But so how does, I was happy to see that Estero was a part of this working committee too. Does our arts and culture group now start to put this in their, how does that work?
One of the next steps for staff is we do have money in the capital budget for the next 10 years. That we have sort of thought ahead in general buckets in terms of things that we budgeted for some money to implement. So one of the things that we're going to do in our group before we come back with the strategy is say where we think the priorities are going to land and whose accountability it is. So it's obviously not necessarily going to be all in one group. It could be in the Parks group, it could be in Estero's group, etc. So we're going to listen to what people are saying now that we've got the draft strategy in front of them. And the online survey is a lot about implementation. What are your priorities? Where do you need to see these things falling? So we can help to put the priorities, not just where we think they should be, but where the community thinks they should be. So you should be seeing that coming forward with the final strategy early next year. I know you won't be here, but that is going to be part of staff's work when we come forward, so you can understand what we've heard and what we think that should be.
Okay, amazing.
And also just on the tree thing, just to close the loop, groups like Park People who help communities find grants.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of ability to go out there and find ways to create sort of a movement around an idea and build a grant bucket for that.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And also connecting with a kind of natural playground approaches so that it's multi-use. Every little green space counts to make it multi-use. So,
I mean, the guy sitting behind me has a hookup with trees. He planted a gazillion trees. Amazing.
A gazillion.
Yeah, you can hook us up. Okay, that's great, and I'm so happy to see this. I feel like I can go into citizenry in a very in a happy space. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to move it, please.
So, moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Whaley. No further discussion. All those in favor? Lawless, thank you very much. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Janice, as well. Item E, Green Building Policy for City-Owned Buildings. There's a presentation by Kevin Van Oudegem. Welcome, Sunda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and the members of Council. We have brought forward a report today for city-owned building to get approval on the 3 recommendations, and we also have brought a policy that that will replace our existing policy that has been approved in year 2008. So the goal of our presentation and the report is to get the approval for those three recommendations and also to get the approval for the policy. The essential differences, you will see that one as Kevin Venudagam goes through that. We have improved in a number of areas, and primarily on the existing buildings, that the previous policy did not address the existing building improvement on energy and greenhouse gas reduction. This one is looking at our existing facilities and also have established a relative targets and some initial percentage reduction. The absolute targets and the detailed design and or site-specific targets will be developed when we come back in 2020 in conjunction with the budget approval, and that's is going to tie with the recommendation number 3. So having said all that, I'm going to ask Kevin to go through all the detailed part of this policy and the nuances on specific parameters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunda, and good afternoon, everyone. So it is my pleasure to be here today, as Sunda says, to present to you the revised green building policy for city-owned buildings. So just, again, as a quick recap since our last discussion here, as you know, our current policy developed in 2008. That's the extent of it there, all 3 lines, which at the time it was developed, I think was quite a progressive move for the city, but we've I think all agree that we've moved beyond that as a city, and new technologies are out there now, and there's new expectations. So we're looking to revise the current policy, which simply states that all new municipal buildings greater than 500 square meters be designed and certified to LEED Silver. Why do this? Really, there's the 3 factors here. We were presented with the notice of motion back in March, which really directed us to take a more, I guess, a leadership role in this respect and look really inwardly at our city-owned buildings as an example for the community. We also know that the council has recently adopted its community scope greenhouse gas emissions reduction target of 80% below our 2010 levels by 2050, which is excellent. We now have a firm target in mind that we can pursue going forward. And lastly, as I said, our current policy is over 10 years old. So this is a graph I presented back in June, and I won't spend very much time at all talking about it. But again, the key takeaway from this slide here is that red line is our target, and the blue bars are how our buildings on aggregate do each year in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And what you see is that essentially by 2030, thereabouts, we will be at a point, at a crossroads, where we are emitting more than our target. So we need to do something about that in the next 10, 12 years. What I've done for today's discussion is just I wanted to take another slice of that data for you, just as good background information. As Sunda mentioned, we are starting to focus now on our existing buildings, and I think it's important we kind of dive into the data a little bit critically with our existing buildings and take a look at how they're performing. So what you see here is essentially our top 16 greenhouse gas emitting facilities, and if you aggregate them all together, it roughly accounts for about 93% of our emissions at city buildings. So it's a pretty comprehensive data set here. What you start to see are some trends develop. So you can see that if we take the first 3 facilities, the Rim Park Sportsplex, the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex, and the Harper Library and YMCA, if you lump all of those together, that's over half, about 54% of our total emissions, just in those 3 facilities. And that's not all that surprising, to be honest. Those are the larger facilities, the ones with ice rinks, the one with pools, so it makes logical sense that they would be among the top emitters. Another way we can look at those same 16 facilities is based on their greenhouse gas intensity, so essentially normalizing for their building area. So we take the greenhouse gas emissions, divide by the total floor area, and this is sort of the graph that you get. So you can see a facility like RIM, the first bar there, that was the largest emitter. It's actually a huge facility, over 300,000 square feet, and on a per square meter basis, you can sort of see how it plays relative to the other facilities. You can start to draw some inferences and some trends here. You can see that the next 2 bars there are the facilities that have pools. So right away you think, well, I got a lot of water I have to heat year round. It makes sense that they would have a higher greenhouse gas intensity. And then you do see the one anomaly there in the middle of the very extreme bar, and that's the crematorium. So that one's high for other reasons, just based on the nature of what happens at that facility. So really that's all great background, I think, as we start to contextualize this new policy here today. So really the key objectives of what we were trying to accomplish, we wanted to take on a more prescriptive methodology with our green building policy to really start hammering at the very specific objectives that we've heard quite clearly from Council around energy reduction and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. We are starting to move away from the LEED certification process. We haven't totally disbanded with it at this point. We think there are merits to it still, but certainly I think as this evolves, we'll start to take more ownership and more responsibility for the metrics that we would like to see internally here at the City of Waterloo, and that'll likely move us away from the LEED certification process. As Sunda mentioned, not only are we focusing on our new buildings, but we are very much now beginning to focus on our existing buildings, which is, as I demonstrated with the graphs previously, is going to be an important piece going forward. And I think really what this iteration of the policy is about is setting up the frameworks for continual improvement going forward, which is going to be a key piece to all of this. So in terms of the policy, again, it applies to city-owned buildings specifically at this time, and it would be whenever a project met any one of these criteria. So if it's a new building greater than 500 square meters in size, this policy would apply. If it was a major addition to an existing building, again, greater than 500 square meters, this would apply. And that's sort of a nuance that's new to this policy that wasn't really clearly captured in the previous policy, this idea about tacking on an addition to an existing building. And then the third piece, which is really a definite step forward, is this idea of if there's a major renovation or a rehabilitation project where the construction budget is greater than $100,000, this policy would apply. So we're not meaning to capture the many of hundreds of operating and maintenance type projects that go on that would be under this sort of $100,000 threshold. These would be for, as an example, a larger piece of mechanical equipment that might be replaced. It would fall under this type of project, or this type of policy. What we're proposing here is that this policy would really start taking effect January 1st, 2020. And the idea here is that we believe that this policy needs to be aligned with a green building funding strategy that would be part of that same budget process. That's a key piece here. But however, during the interim period, we do intend to apply this policy wherever it's practically and financially feasible. So understanding there are existing project and funding constraints around the projects that have been budgeted that may limit the total adoption of this policy in all cases. It would certainly be our intention to do as much as we can within those existing constraints in the interim period. And then lastly, I think an important piece of this policy is, we're really starting to hammer in on the energy efficiency, the greenhouse gas reduction, as well as this idea about resiliency. So this is making our buildings more resilient to climate change, to extreme heat, extreme cold, flooding events, things like that. Back in June, Council did endorse the proposed framework that you see here, this 5-category framework, which was originally developed by the City of Toronto. But what we've done here is we've really focused in on the first piece, the energy, GHG, and resiliency piece, and really started to tweak it and align it with the City of Waterloo's objectives. So our policy has 2 streams. The first stream is for new buildings and major additions to existing buildings. And the second stream, as I say, is for the existing buildings, the major renovations, retrofits, that type of work. Within the stream A, the new buildings and the major additions, so what we're essentially saying here is that we do still reference LEED Silver as a minimum target, but the main difference here is that in our current policy, LEED Silver is really the high water mark. That is the ultimate objective. And what we're saying is that's now sort of the minimum acceptable standard. So it's there more just to cover some areas that we're not as explicit on, as we're focusing more on the energy and GHG piece, but we're sort of saying where that used to be the best that we're kind of asking for, now it's sort of the least we'll accept. Where we've really started to make inroads here, I believe, is on this next bullet, which is starting to set some hard targets around energy efficiency and GHG. And we're actually asking for a minimum 25% improvement beyond what the Ontario Building Code SB 10 specifically mandates, which is, I think, a very I think it's a very practical step forward, but at the same time, I think it's really a great advancement for the City of Waterloo in this respect. And the last bullet there, we've also started to develop a path for net zero energy and net zero greenhouse gas emitting buildings. what you see here in front of you is really sort of the meat of the policy as it relates to Stream A. And I won't go into all the details. I'm sure you've all read it. But just to pull out a couple highlights that kind of jump out at me if I were looking at this policy. The first category, energy efficiency, that's really around that 25% reduction target that I spoke about. Item 2, renewable energy. The one I'd like to highlight here is 2.1, solar readiness. This, I think, is a very practical step that we can take. In a lot of cases, we might not have the funding right up front to do like a rooftop solar installation. But what we can do for a minimum or minimal expense is upgrade the roof structure, install that necessary electrical infrastructure, leave room in electrical and mechanical spaces so that when we do come into funding or we have other partnerships, we're not looking at a very disruptive and expensive proposition to install the rooftop solar. It's really ready to go, and it's just a matter of installing it. So I think, again, that's a very sort of theme of this policy, very practical, but a very meaningful step forward. Item 3, operational systems. I think the big one here for me is 3.2, independent verification. What we've done here, which I think is very unique with our policy, is we've sort of said that we're requiring 3 more or less independent checks along the lifespan of a building. The first one happens during design. So we're saying outside of the contract that we'll engage with the prime architect in, we're going to have an independent energy modeler that will be responsible for modeling the predicted performance of the building during the design phase. So as we're having these meaningful conversations around site orientation and massing and all that sort of stuff, the energy modeler there is in the background running the numbers and saying, yep, we check in with you a few times during design and yet you're looking good. That's all well and good, but when the thing gets constructed, that's another checkpoint. So we have a commissioning agent that we're recommending where as construction is happening, it's important to make sure that mechanical electrical systems are being installed as they were intended during the design. And that, again, is an independent checkpoint where the commissioning agent will go through and say, yep, you're on track there. When the ribbon cutting happens, you're where you need to be. But just like your vehicle, over time, the buildings need a tune-up. And that's sort of the third checkpoint that at the 6-month, 12-month period, we're proposing we have an independent monitoring and verification program where a consultant would come back in, look at our energy bills and say, yeah, your building is still performing within spec. Item 4, building resiliency. I think this is, again, a really interesting one for me, and it's one that as we reduce our reliance on the grid for electricity, as an example, inherently our buildings become more resilient to extreme weather events and power outages and ice storms and that sort of thing. So we're starting to move the policy in that direction as well, that if we can withstand these more frequent flooding events without having to do major expense repairing the buildings after the fact, or if they can be there for the community in a time of need, that's again a very prudent step forward and one that we're starting to develop in this policy going forward. And then the last one, which is again sort of a City of Waterloo piece here we put in, is this idea of financial responsibility. So the 5.1 there, incentives, grants, and rebates. I'll give you an example. On our last major retrofit project, we were handed a check from Waterloo North Hydro through the Save on Energy program for over $200,000. And all that took was engaging with them early on and in a meaningful way. And all we're doing with the policy here now is formalizing that at the very early stages of the project, let's check in with the local utilities and maximize the amount of money that we can get back in to reinvest in these other initiatives. So when we get to the Stream B, the existing buildings, what we're proposing here is that we, as I say, would aim to implement the Stream A requirements wherever it makes practical and financial sense, understanding that in some cases, we do have buildings constructed in the 1800s as an example. They might not be a great candidate for solar readiness. So there's going to be certain cases where it just doesn't make sense for existing buildings. But I think one of the real steps forward we will make here with our existing buildings is the second bullet where we talk about when we do condition assessments, historically we'll look at, how's the structural system doing? How's the roof doing? Are the windows in good shape? What we're saying as policy is let's also take a look at how the building is performing from an energy and a greenhouse gas perspective. That's a critical piece, a critical data point for us that when we do our planning and capital budgeting, we can start to work that piece in and say, yep, we need to address these areas in this building. And then lastly, for any mechanical electrical projects that are greater than $100,000, we'll be asking of staff to develop or present the anticipated energy and greenhouse gas reductions so that when we're in a situation where we're trying to decide which of 2 projects goes forward, it's another great data piece that we can say this one contributes more to our greenhouse gas bottom line. So in conclusion, I'd just like to leave you with this last figure, which I think kind of shows, in my opinion, how the city might progress in the next number of years in terms of our greenhouse gas reduction. So you can see presently the gray area there, we've already achieved about a 30% reduction from our 2010 levels, which is great. But we certainly have benefited from the overall decarbonization of Ontario's electricity grid, among other things. So we know that there's more which we can and should do. I think in the next 10 years to get to sort of our 50% mark, we're going to have to start, as I say, moving away from the lead methodology and really starting to drive our investment dollars in the areas of greenhouse gas and energy efficiency. We'll look for the projects that have the reasonable return on investments, the shortest paybacks initially, because we can generate cash flow back into our projects. We're going to, again, focus more and more, I believe, going forward on our existing buildings, just like we have been in the past on our new buildings. And again, I think this next 10-year period is really about setting up that framework and that strategy going forward to make sure we can hit our longer-term goals. And I think if we do those things, we'll be able to, in our 30 years, we have our 80% reduction target, and we know that at a certain point we'll sort of hit up against diminishing returns in some of these initiatives. We'll have to do them because they make good sense, not necessarily because they're generating cash flow to us anymore. We'll have to start thinking differently, look at new technologies, and we may have hard discussions around, does it make sense to pour a bunch of money into an existing building that was constructed in the 60s, or is it a better strategy to demolish that building and rebuild it with a brand new one that's more energy efficient? And I think that's, in my opinion, how sort of the next 30 years might unfold. And why I wanted to show this is I think it provides very good context today to understand how our policy has been written and where it's been written for. And we're really looking at that first piece of the next 10 years. That's what we're doing here. We're sort of putting together what I would say are practical next steps. And certainly there'll be more to come as we move forward. And these, to me, are the key takeaways today. Again, this is an important step forward. Certainly more needs to be done and will be done going forward. But I think a very important next step for us will be a funding and an implementation strategy to support this policy. So that's all I have, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. First out of the gate is Councillor Whaley.
You're right, it's a giant step forward, Kevin. But I have one issue with it, and that's the implementation and the start date of January 2020. For example, today, we just approved 15 minutes ago over $1 million in roof repairs for two of our major arenas. So $1 million is going in, but it's not until 2020 that we can take advantage of one of the progressive ideas you have with respect to solar readiness. So here we have the money being spent today. The roofs are going to last for 20 to 30 years, but the solar readiness isn't there because this thing doesn't kick in until 2020. So that's an issue. Now, with respect to two of the biggest events coming up in the next term of council will be the senior center build and the library build. So again, we're in the process now of doing the work to make these things happen. And these are the most important new buildings that we're going to have in the next 10 or 15 years. And this policy, because it's not implemented until 2020, misses out on our two big builds. And you know what? That just doesn't make sense to me. And I'd like your comments on that.
Of course, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I think the benefit in me being involved in all of those initiatives, and Sunda as well, is a lot of what you've seen today, we've actually already baked into the RFP for the WMRC expansion. So things like those 3 independent checkpoints, as an example, the architect is doing that. We've asked for it already. We're going through the sustainability workshops with them now. We're doing a lot of this stuff, I would say, because it makes sense, because it's best practice. You're correct in saying that we're sort of drawing that firm line in the sand in 2020, because we believe that for the future it would be most advantageous if we could include this sort of a discussion when we're budgeting the future projects. But certainly with respect to the East Side Library and the WMRC expansion, we've included a substantial portion of it to the extent we can within existing funding envelopes within those two projects.
Substantial, but not all. And that seems to me a missed opportunity here. You've done the work. You've created the strategy. You're asking for our approval tonight, but you're asking it to fall outside of this council's purview and into 2020. That's a long way off. And we're missing these opportunities. I'm interested. I'm glad that we have the sustainability committee here, the volunteer committee, speaking on a number of issues tonight. With respect to the solar readiness, if you're not going to, if council agrees that 2020 is a timeline, I'm opposed to that. At least have this solar readiness idea talked about for these $2 million roofs that we're putting on. At least discussed, at least considered, because it seems, again, like a wasted opportunity. We have policy that we agree on, but that we stall on implementation, and you know what, it just doesn't work for me.
Next up is Councilor Maven, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Kevin, can you go to slide 5, please? Because I think it ties into the point that Councilor Whaley was making. My interpretation, anyway. If you look at from 2010, 2016, as you said, we've made excellent strides forward. But for some reason, 2016 isn't just the next, 2017 doesn't go down along the same trend line that you get from 2010 to 2016. All of a sudden, it goes up. Are the issues that Councillor Whaley is raising, are they part of the reason why all of a sudden or it goes up?
Sure, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So the reason you see that bump is that we factored in going forward all the known additions in square footage, I'll call it, to our portfolio. So going forward, we know we'll be adding square footage at the rec center. We know we'll be adding square footage at Rim Park. So this really looks at the absolute greenhouse gas emissions for the city. So as we do more buildings, we add more square footage. That will sort of drive the number up in the future, which is the trend that you've just identified.
Right, but if 2016 is our baseline, it would only make sense if we're putting improvements in, and if we're doing the right things according to the policy, then 2017 and so on would trend down, not up.
Yeah, so for existing buildings where we're not adding square footage, that would be the case. We would continue to see a downward trend. But if we've added square footage to a building, that just hits us straight at the top. It's additional greenhouse gas emissions just because the building exists and it's heated and there's electricity there that we would then have to counter over time. But that's sort of the initial hit that we receive because we add square footage. But certainly for buildings where we're replacing mechanical equipment, we're doing building envelope upgrades, you would continually see that trend line reduce.
Okay. Another side of it, and maybe it's somewhere in the policy and I just didn't see it, but green roofs and trees and so on, they're not necessarily always, the trees especially, related to city buildings, but they're part of the carbon footprint one way or another. Is that going to become part of the policy someplace?
It definitely could. I think with green buildings, they definitely come at a cost. And some of the research would suggest that the payback isn't necessarily there. You're right, they do contribute to greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is quite critical in very densified areas where there's not a lot of green space left over. But as an example, at the Eastside Library, we have a roof that's going to be about 15,000 square feet. If we turn that into a green roof, it's sort of a drop in the bucket in relation to the overall Rim Park site from a ability of vegetation to absorb carbon dioxide. So there's sort of a point at which green roofs would make sense. And certainly that's something we could look at with future iterations of this policy. Some of that would be covered under LEED as well. Within the LEED Silver program, there would be still an opportunity to pursue those credits through the LEED Silver process.
Okay, and finally, the nice thing about the perpetual policy, the zero energy use, or energy neutral, if you will. I mean, that's already been proven to happen with the building that they built in the tech park, I think. So is that a more reasonable target than the 80% reduction?
I would say it's definitely a goal, and I think eventually at some point we'll have to get there as a community. It will be a very real challenge when it comes to existing buildings to reach that point. As an example, a building that was constructed in the 1960s might have minimal insulation on the wall, and to really get to zero energy, we would have to totally remove the wall assembly and rebuild it from scratch. And there would likely be a point at which that wouldn't make practical or financial sense anymore for a facility with those attributes. But certainly new buildings going forward, I think that could be a very real target in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Next up, Councillor Freeman, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I think, like, I appreciate all the work that's been put into this. Thank you very much. One of the things that might come up is kind of that ability to think differently if opportunities present themselves, because I know that we have a lot of companies, private companies, that have reached out to the city in the past to see whether they can essentially lease our roof to put in photovoltaics, which is what Councillor Whaley was making reference to. My gut instinct is that, structurally there'd have to be a lot of investment made on the roofs that we're replacing to be able to withstand the weight of photocells. But one of the areas that's still associated with our holding, but not necessarily the physical building itself, is our parking spaces and our parking lot. And that's something that they have done in an effort to make Evolve One a net positive building, is that they're using the photovoltaics over the parking lot to offset emissions. And so maybe we can start thinking a little bit differently around those pieces, and getting a sense of whether or not you could lease airspace above parking lots to offset facility emissions. And of course that also helps with snow removal, because you're obviously not getting snow over the photocells. So it's just an idea of some other ways to think about the holding and see look at the properties as a whole as opposed to just the buildings themselves.
Thank you. Yes, that's going to be our next few years, the next couple of years work on it. As we mentioned, that we have not established site-specific targets for facilities. So coming years, that would be our assessment to sort of determine the site-specific targets for facilities where we can sort of save energy and reduce greenhouse gas. And that's the part is in the report. We may not have mentioned that one in here. So those site-specific ones is part of the work plan. And also one other piece I would like to mention about green roof. Yes, green roof is on our radar, but right now the item number 1, there are 5 goals. The first goal is to meet greenhouse gas reduction and energy savings. So we can hit both through solar panels more easily than other methods. So that's the other reason why we are focusing on solar panels.
Any further questions of staff before we have a delegation? Seeing none, thank you. And I'd like to call up Matt Thiessen, Chair of our Sustainability Advisory Committee. Welcome, Matt, and thanks for making the bike ride here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to present today and provide some feedback on the green building policy that's been put forward by staff. And I'd like to start by, first of all, congratulating staff and thanking them on a tremendous amount of effort that has gone into the development of the policy in 2 ways. One, it's a really positive step forward, as I think we've touched on in a few points of the discussion already, from the 2 lines that existed there beforehand. So very, very positive step in the right direction. And the second part is just their collaborative approach that they've taken with SAC. We do have expertise on our committee that's from the green building industry, and has it's been great to work kind of collaboratively with staff to try and move this forward. We see the importance of this policy, as we've talked about through Councillor Whaley's comments and others, that the stuff we build now is going to be with us for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so this is our opportunity to get it right. It's a lot more cost effective to our taxpayers to do this at the start of a project, rather than trying to retrofit something 20 years down the road for compliance purposes or cost efficiency purposes, and so on and so forth. And I think it's really critical that this policy comes forward. It's a great point in time, having just approved the 80% reduction target. And it's a great example of something that would actually make a meaningful impact. To the discussion on, why is that trend line changing? on some of our existing buildings right now. We saw a really big gift from the province, essentially cleaning up our electricity grid. That's not going to come again. So it's now really on the city and our own asset management to move that needle forward. So that all being said, we think this is a very positive step forward, and we do have some feedback that we hope will provide value add to the discussion. First of all, we think that the 25% above code target that's listed in the policy is a positive starting point for discussion. It is a firm target that can be looked at, and we think that's a good step in the right direction. But if we read the policy in section 1.1 and 1.2, we think the shift in a relatively short amount of time needs to be from moving that 25% to looking at that net zero or net positive, even where possible, standard for new buildings, because that is really how do we stop digging the hole deeper that we'd have to change down the road. So we would strongly encourage council and staff to move that more ambitious in a shorter window of time, and we recognize the constraints around that, but think it's incredibly important to do that. We would also suggest on that there's, when we do modeling of building energy, there's ways that you can use modeling to kind of tell you the story that you want to see. And so for staff and council to consider things like thermal bridging and other pieces that can kind of figure out how the envelope can be as efficient as possible, and in doing so, make sure that the modeling doesn't just tell us the story we want to hear when those come forward. So that third-party piece we think is really critical, and we're really pleased to see staff moving that forward. Another piece that we recommend gets looked at comes down to the financial accountability of these projects. And again, drawing on some of the expertise that we have on Sustainability Advisory Committee, there's a concept that a green building has to be more expensive, and that's, I think, only true if you look, and not always true if you looked at the construction cost of the building. And we would really strongly encourage council in exercising its fiduciary responsibility to be considering the life cycle cost of the building. So it's not just how much is the thing going to cost to put up, but how much is the energy going to be every year that we have to pay forward? What are the risks that are embedded in that? Prices go up, we have no option but to pay those. And so looking at the overall asset life cycle of the assets that we're building can often paint a much better picture than just looking at the upfront costs in terms of energy savings, in terms of the management of those buildings. And your point actually on green roofs is an interesting example where I've actually seen a couple different studies that you only have to replace a green roof because they protect the liner of the top of the building better than what a conventional roof structure is. Once for every 2 times you'd have to replace a conventional roof. You might only have to do a green roof once. So the cost savings embedded in that. They also add some insulation to the top of the building, can often be, from a life cycle perspective, more cost effective than conventional. So we would really encourage staff, as they're looking at projects, and council as they're approving them, to be leaning towards that life cycle approach to managing buildings. And of course, hopefully as the funding strategy comes forward, that'll really be highlighted and referenced. And the last piece was, again, just noting some of these comments on not locking ourselves into something. We think the review window for this policy should be a bit tighter than what has been put in the policy. And so we had provided that feedback to staff, and glad to see that it was implemented in part, but would strongly encourage that to be tightened further, particularly as a new council comes forward. I would suggest within a 1-year time frame that we do a review of this as a new policy, and suggest some opportunity areas for improvement as we've talked about. So SAC would, again, like to congratulate staff. I think you've done a tremendous job putting this forward. It is a very positive step in the right direction, and we would like to endorse that, the council, and encourage council to approve the policy, with hopefully the stipulation that that review period is tightened and some of those amendments are considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. I have questions from Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate coming in and representing the committee. I want to get to your last point first, and when we go around, I'll then have questions for staff after folks have been asking for you. Mm-hmm. If I heard you correctly, what I heard you say was we should approve this policy today, which won't formally come into effect until 2020 when we can actually fund it, but we should review it in 2019 before it's being used.
I would suggest that we change that so that it is, as Councillor Whaley mentioned, applicable sooner. and that gives us actually some time to chat through some of those feedback points in a shorter window of time. Otherwise, I agree, I think we're missing some opportunities there.
Further questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you. And thanks for, where were you biking from? I saw you come to bike on
the university.
Oh, not too far. On the beautiful new Laurel Greenway. Soon to be beautiful Laurel Greenway. That's all the delegates we have. I'll turn it over to Council for thoughts on this. Councillor Henry.
Question for staff first, and then I'll have all the comments to get the stuff on the floor. So I think there's a staff table waiting for you. I think one of the we've heard two things, and I'd like to hear comments on that from the folks on policy. First one is considerations around life cycle costing, which I take to be a net present value analysis rather than the ROI analysis that's suggested. So I'd first like to hear you speak to the choices that staff have made in this policy and what constraints staff feel they're operating under. And the other is decision points around why, for the two new buildings that are coming through, that a retroactive application of this policy back to early this year, last year, the year before, when council began and set the constraints around those projects, why staff don't feel that going backwards on those makes sense on those, since those are the choices that were made here. I'd be happy to hear you speak to both of those.
The first one, yes, we have been, even before we have introduced this green building policy, we have started looking at life cycle cost for all of our capital projects, and when we introduce a new project or expansion, we have operating budget associated with it. And when council, even at the last council session, the capital budget session, we have operating budget included. So that life cycle cost piece has been embedded in the program in my mind, but what we are doing in here is a life cycle cost, is we are trying to balance between the return of interest ROI and present value. There are times that we may want to, there's a fine line walk between the two different proposals. The long-term financial gain may not be able to allow us to survive for the short-term financial stability. So in order to sort of balance that one, short-term financial stability versus long-term financial goal have to be weighed in and to be picked prudently. So that's the part we will be doing with finance in the city, to make sure that we are not stepping over to disturb the stability for the short terms. So, did I answer everything? Or?
Well, I think that was two parts. One was how we were considering the approach to new projects and retrofits and that investment in terms of the two different mechanisms. My interpretation is Matt suggesting spend all the money you can up front if the life cycle analysis shows you some stuff, and the staff analysis, particularly on retrofit, is figure out how we can fill up the budget envelope that we have and spend and do the best possible project for the dollars that we've allocated. And those are a little bit different. Second one was looking back to the projects that are in design at the moment, the two buildings that seem to be contentious on this, and why staff is not suggesting a retroactive application of this policy to those projects that are in process.
I'm going to ask Kevin to answer, but I think we have already incorporated a number of things within our existing project that are the two major projects. but we do not want to come out explicitly that we will be able to meet because the funding approval has been given before we have started writing the terms of reference and the RFPs. While we are making every effort to incorporate all the policy elements that we have just demonstrated or presented here, but we are very early stage in the two projects. We have just hired a consultant on one project. We haven't hired another consultant for the other one. So we like to be, this is more, in my mind, more of a cautionary step than anything at this point.
And maybe the one thing I might add too is if I just think of a fictitious scenario and say we had an extra $1 million we wanted to invest, and I guess one option would be let's invest that at the new East Side Branch Library and the WMRC and drive those buildings, those new additions, even more energy efficient. That would be one approach, but I guess my thought would be that those new pieces are already going to be some of our best performing buildings as part of our portfolio just because they're being built to a higher standard today, the SP10 standard. They're already going to be, if you recall the graph I showed about our building portfolio, they're already going to be some of the best buildings when they're built in terms of energy and greenhouse gas emissions. I think if we look at where could we spend that fictitious $1 million and really put a larger dent in our corporate greenhouse gas emissions, it would be through things like at the rec center implementing a geo-exchange system, which, as you will recall, we were pursuing a $2 million grant through the provincial government for that, which was going to drop our greenhouse gas emissions of that facility by nearly 50%, which when you think about the WMRC as our second highest emitting building corporately, that would have been massive for this target, and that would have been another way that we could have invested, say, that $1 or $2 million as opposed to putting that into the new buildings that are being constructed, which, as I say, are already going to be fairly energy efficient.
Okay, so it sounds like there's other ways of investing money. Further questions? Seeing none.
So I'm happy to put the motion as printed on the floor, track to seconder, and then speak to it.
Okay. Second by Councillor Freeman.
So I appreciate all the work that staff has done, that our SAC has done in terms of providing input that's made the policy stronger, because there has been some back and forth to get to today. But I want to go back to the reason why I asked for an update to the green building policy in the first place. Ours was stuck 10 years ago, back when LEED Silver was a significant accomplishment. Today, it can be business as usual. And in fact, our third worst performing building in terms of total output of greenhouse gases is a LEED Silver building. That was the most recent one we constructed. So it shows you that the policy that we had didn't take into account the goals that we need to have in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. The seal on the building doesn't tell the whole story, and we needed to move beyond it to do a lot more. The most significant impact that we can make in terms of our carbon footprint and in terms of our energy costs that we can reduce is in the buildings that we already have. And the most focus for investment that we need to have is in those buildings, and we need to continually do better on any new thing that we have. I think this policy does that. And as I think Kevin explained in his last slide around timing of where this is targeted, this is a next 10-year strategy so that we use every single dollar we have to drive the most cost efficiency, the most greenhouse gas efficiency we possibly can. In order to do that, we need a funding strategy because we don't have one today. There are no dollars for this today. And asking for it to be applied today without applying dollars to budgets that have already been baked and projects that are already started, I think is irresponsible. We have to fund a policy for it to be in effect. And we need to make sure that our budget cycle lines up with our ambition to be able to do that, because we have a responsibility to the community to present a budget that makes sense and that's coherent and that considers all of the priorities that we're facing. And that's why I think having this come into full effect, use it as much now, once we get the next full budget cycle, makes a lot of sense, because there's a few opportunities I think we have to change how we're funding green buildings today. Today, every dollar that we save from the investments we've made, the over $1 million that we've saved between the LED changes on streetlights and the building efficiencies, 25% we roll forward so we can do the next project. 75% backstops the operating budget and helps plug a hole. At the very least, that should be reversed. The only way we're going to make substantial progress and get the most work done as fast as possible to drive those targets is if the dollars that we save roll forward and help us solve not just the greenhouse gas challenges and energy efficiency challenges we have, but also helps us solve the infrastructure gap that we have on facilities at the same time. We can use that as a virtuous circle, I think, to fund more and more. And by the time we're into 2025, 2026, 2027, we will have a real substantial pot of money that we can drive the really difficult greenhouse gases out of the system to really drive towards net zero energy. And I think this is a strategy that builds financially upon itself. It protects our ratepayers from us borrowing well into the future to try to build nirvana today, but we can get there step by step over time. And I think that's where staff have put us. And I think this responds to the call that I made and that this council made. I think it does it responsibly and very well. And just briefly on Councillor Freeman's note on solar panels and the others, Grand River Energy is a cooperation between all three local distribution companies. It's wholly owned by the public through the municipalities in this region. We are doing PV projects. I would hope that we will be doing PV projects on City of Waterloo buildings, just as like I hope City of Kitchener, City of Cambridge would also be considering the same. I think there might be opportunities to leverage their resources in ways that keep our debt off of the city's books and provide us a rate of return through our holding company. So I think we've got good opportunities to leverage the strengths of this policy and drive things really quickly.
Thank you. Further comments on the motion? Councillor Whaley.
A very good discussion, and I appreciate having had input at the beginning and how I've changed my opinion on this. I'm encouraged to hear that these two new bills that we look at, you're going to consider best practices. You're going to consider a lot of the information that's in this program and in this new policy and implement them. I encourage you to look for further opportunities as you go on to find other ways to make these buildings green as they're built and into the future. I appreciate the comments I heard around funding, and I agree with that too. So, with what I've heard and with my full confidence that you're going to make sure that these two buildings are going to be the best they can be, I'll be supporting this motion.
Wonderful. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
One item left, Anna Marie, and it's a great one. So
it's good because it's
welcome to great to hear you. 2015-2018 strategic plan, the final 2018 progress report. Take us home, Anna Marie.
Alrighty. Okay, so I'm between everyone in this room and dinner. Hard place to be.
It's fine. It's a great report. So we want to hear about all the accomplishments the city's made.
I'm here tonight in a new capacity as Executive Officer to the CAO, and hence this presentation. So just briefly, we'll look at the strategic plan framework and the reporting framework, highlight for you some 2018 progress highlights, and then discuss next steps with regards to developing a new strategic plan. So this is our third annual progress update, and it is complemented by our annual community yearbook and our performance dashboard. So both of these additional pieces can be found on our website at our strategic plan location. Okay, so as you recall, we have 43 objectives, 65 initiatives, and 6 strategic priority areas in our strategic plan. And so the update looks at progress in these 6 areas. And in particular, you'll note that in Appendix A, it's segmented into these strategic priority areas and then into those 65 initiatives. There's also a status report for each of the initiatives. And in our status report, we use a streetlight coding. And so at this time, there are no projects listed as at risk. There are 4 listed as behind schedule, and the remainder are completed or on track. Okay, so now I'll start to look at these 6 areas and provide some updates for you. And this update in particular is an annual progress update. We will close out the strategy in about approximately April. And our last progress update was in November. And so these updates will be since November. Okay, so multimodal transportation. Our lovely Central Promenade, which has been spoken about a few times tonight, we celebrated the grand opening on September 6th. And this King Street Streetscape project, also mentioned a bit this afternoon already. We will be officially celebrating this new feature and resource in our community on September 29th at 6:30. So if anyone's interested, you can meet at the Spurline Trail at King Street. So this project really does underscore our strategic commitment to multimodal transportation. And so as you can see, the project included replacement of underground infrastructure that you can't see, and then improved sidewalks, amenity spaces along the street, beautification of the walkways, an addition of new LED lights, updated benches, and separated cycling lanes. Alrighty, Columbia Street West redesign. This is a really significant corridor in our community, particularly giving access to the west side. This is what it looked like before the project. The road portion of the project has recently been completed. This photo was taken last week. The project included construction of a multi-lane roundabout, widening and full urbanization of 1.2 kilometers to 4 lanes of traffic, raised bike lanes, landscape medians, sidewalks, and multi-use trails. All of this improvement, and this project is expected to be completed under budget. Alrighty, so it's obvious that we have a commitment to multimodal transportation. And because of this obvious emphasis, we on April 17th received the Gold Level Bicycle Friendly Community Designation Award from Share the Road Cycling Coalition. Waterloo was the first mid-sized city in Ontario to receive this designation. Moving into infrastructure renewal, Parkview Cemetery. The cemetery services officially opened their new expansion area, their open house on June 16th. The expansion allows for almost 2,000 new burial lots, and as green burials are starting to trend in our community, we now have 108 green burial lots now available at our Parkview Cemetery. Our City, Our Way ran from December through January, and it was a public engagement process. This was to support development of our long-term financial plan and the asset management plan. The long-term financial plan was presented to Council in April. So shifting to environmental leadership, the green building policy. This project was listed as at risk in the last update in November. And I would say there was significant work done by staff in collaboration with Council and our Sustainability Advisory Committee to move this project forward, with some additional capacity being offered by the content experts on SAC. So you saw that just moments ago. And this was also mentioned earlier today too. So we've been working away on asset improvements related to energy efficiency, and Waterloo North Hydro recognized this work through their retrofit rebate called Save on Energy, and we received quite a sizable check that evening at $435,000 and change. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities in February recognized the City of Waterloo for our Community Climate Action Plan. Most noteworthy were two aspects. We are the only grouping, our local municipalities. Nowhere else in Canada is there a municipality or grouping of municipalities working collaboratively on their climate plans. So this was a first in Canada, and they also identified that we were the most efficient, even though we were all working together. So there is something good happening there. Alrighty, shifting to strong community. Our neighborhood strategy was approved by Council on May 15th, and as was the Neighborhood Matching Fund. The city has also entered into a funding agreement with the KW Community Foundation, who will be providing $20,000 over the next 2 years to support the neighborhood strategy implementation. This past orientation week, or days, and in particular on the Thursday of that week, Waterloo firefighters and fire prevention teams teamed up with Wilfrid Laurier University to deliver dorm room and cooking fire demonstrations. They reached 4,000 first-year and international students. The Geese Family Centre, Hospice Waterloo Region, on Friday, September 7th, was the groundbreaking for this community resource. And we as an organization have been working on joint design efforts to support development of this needed resource in our community. So while we sometimes receive awards, as an organization we also offer into the community awards. And so I'd highlight two, Swim for Life. The Swim for Life was a contest open to all Waterloo residents over the summer, and it received over 600 entries. Jillian Clarkson will enjoy a lifetime of swimming with her free swim pass for life. 2018 Senior of the Year, Madeith Radlin was honored as an outstanding senior who, after the age of 65, has enriched the social, cultural, and civic life of our community. 2018, this year, we recently received the Age-Friendly Community Recognition Award in Category 1. So this category celebrates the work of Ontario communities that are striving to become age-friendly and are showcasing promising practices. This award was presented to the City of Waterloo on March 26th at a symposium in Toronto. So this year, we had 10 inductees to the 25 years of service here at the City of Waterloo. And our very own Ed Gasparsky was recognized by the Ontario Parks Association for his leadership and his skill in horticulture. A project manual has been approved by Council. It provides valuable tools and a framework for corporate project management and service delivery. It builds upon established best practices, a made-in-Waterloo approach for enhanced cost control, project scoping, contractor and consultant management, and timely completion of capital projects. So you may be aware as you head to your offices that City Hall has been undergoing space planning, and so aligning staff for efficiencies is well underway. Our Emergency Operations Center and servers are now out of the floodplain and relocated to the service center, and our new salt shed is ready to serve. With any luck, we won't be needing that salt for a few more weeks anyhow. Let's hope. Alrighty, so Community Services has launched an employee development program with 2 pilots, job shadowing and a mentorship program. With the launch of this program, Community Service may very well be leading the way for the organization to follow that will support being ready to respond to the need for succession planning. And the investment in staff will also benefit our customers through mentored customer service delivery and learning. The studio opened this year, and it's a multi-use space for staff to help them balance work and well-being. And economic development is our final theme in our existing strategic plan. And what would patio season be without uptown patios? We know patios can be inviting and they animate urban spaces. Our 2017 patio sidewalk pilot extended to 2018. And so there were patio applications were received and approved to enable a vibrant patio season in Waterloo. And this is one of our most recent additions, the Anchor Bar. So far this year, we have, as an organization, supported 148 cultural events. Our newest is Festival of Lights, named Lumen. Lumen will take place in various locations in Uptown Waterloo on September 29th from 6 to 11. It's a festival that will illuminate Uptown and engage audiences in hands-on experiences. The festival will feature over 25 artists, both local and international. It will showcase Waterloo's vibrancy and identity as an innovation hub while exploring the convergence of technology and creativity. The event is free and open to the public. So, as this current council term comes to a close, we begin to look at our existing strategic plan that will remain as our guiding document. But it is important, and it's time that we begin to look at the future of strategic planning and where that guiding document will begin to move to. And so I want to share with you in this next slide the steps that have been undertaken and the next steps that we plan to take to develop a new strategic plan for this organization. So the 2019 business plans are currently underway. The strategic plan for 2019 to 2022 will be developed over the next year. It will follow 4 phases, these phases that are up on the screen. And you can notice we're currently in that initiate phase. So I want to let you know that we've established an internal working group which has 2 subcommittees. One subcommittee focused on engagement, the other on measurement and monitoring. We're in the process of procuring a consultant. And all of this work will culminate with a final strategic plan coming to the new council in June of 2019. Each of these phases, there will be planned engagement for council, for the community, and for staff. Once that is endorsed and brought forward, the next step will be the 2020-23 business plan development process. That will begin with a new strategic plan. So I think that gives everyone a bit of a snapshot of where we've been, say since November of last year to now, where we're at, and where we're going with regards to strategic planning. So with that, this is the recommendation that's before you, and I'm here for any questions. Thanks.
Wonderful, Anne Marie. Right on time, and lots of good content there. Questions from councillors? I don't see any, but I see Councillor Henry would.
So just briefly, I figure as Strategic Planning Committee Chair, I should say something about the strategic plan update. Thank you for it. I think this is very helpful. It's good to know we were able to rescue some of the items on it and that these are, for the most part, on track. But I wanted to speak mostly to the very last recommendation, which is the new strategic plan underway. I'll say first, I appreciate a lot of the initiatives we've been able to do over the last 4 years to make the strategic plan better. It is much trimmer than the previous strategic plans we've seen, and so easier for us to keep some coherence around. We've seen new community snapshot reports that help tell the story of what we've been doing, and we have these annual updates that allow us to know how many of these initiatives are moving forward. All of that is great. In the next 4 years, as we mobilize for the next strategic plan, I think it's really important for us to continue to look at our process and make sure that what we have is streamlined, focused, measurable, and that we understand what targets we're trying to hit, so that council and senior management can really make sure that we're achieving big progress on the big moves we're trying to make. We're starting to do some target work, but we're nowhere near where I think we can be to be able to really know that we're driving those initiatives and change. So, for example, multimodal transportation. How are we doing on the mode split in Waterloo? Has it moved in the 4 years because of the initiatives we've done? That would be a good target, not just a list of actions, which is important, but we need to see on the broad level, do we have targets that are connected to what we're trying to achieve, and have we made progress towards them? And I think those are the things that will allow council to figure out whether we need to pivot some of the action lists we're seeing, respond differently, and more importantly, it will allow our commissioners and directors to be a lot more agile in how they're responding to balancing initiatives if we have some really clear targets that roll up so that we can see, are we making the kinds of progress that we want to see? So this is good. It's a great start. It's much better than where we were 4 years ago, but I'm hopeful that the next one will allow us to keep moving even further towards making progress on key actions for the citizens want us to do.
And seeing no further comments, I think I'd like to say to the Deputy CAO, unfortunately Tim isn't here to take the accolades, but I think on behalf of Council, to all of staff, thank you for helping us represent the citizens here and making all the strategic items that we hope to make progress on, all of them come to life. So if you could pass that along to staff, I think on behalf of Council, I'm looking around and seeing a lot of nodding heads, so thank you on behalf of all of us here. But with that, somebody has to make a motion to move it, and since you're strategic chair, I know you'll move it. Councillor Burke had his hand up there too. With that, all those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you, and thank you, Anna Marie, for a great presentation. And with that, I think we're recessed until 6:30 p.m.